It started on a morning that slipped by unnoticed, just another seemingly ordinary day within the sanctuary, where shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy like spears, and the scent of damp soil mingled with human perspiration. Ranger Elias knew these trails like the back of his hand. He had traversed them countless times. But today, there was something different in the air. The jungle was eerily silent. No monkey calls, no bird song, only an oppressive stillness, a tense, waiting silence. Elias stopped walking near the southern edge of the sanctuary where the trees gave way to marshland. His gaze swept across the dense brush, eyes narrowing. He caught sight of movement, subtle but undeniable. A large, shadowy shape shifted within the undergrowth. It wasn't threatening, at least not to him. It was Kazzy, a full-grown silverback gorilla Elias recognized instantly. Kazzy had been rescued as an orphan years ago and had matured into the quiet sentinel of this part of the forest. But now, something was clearly amiss. Kazzy wasn't displaying his usual dominant behavior. No chest beating or warning gestures. Instead, he was pacing in tight, tense circles. His gaze locked onto Elias with a strange intensity, as though he were silently pleading for him to come closer, to follow. Then Kazzy let out an odd, stuttered grunt, low and broken. Before turning and vanishing into the foliage, Elias didn't hesitate. His instincts surged to the forefront. He dropped his pack and began to follow. Kazzy didn't look back. He moved swiftly, almost ghost-like, threading to the trees with urgency. Elias had to run to keep up. Then, abruptly, Kazzy stopped beneath a break in the trees where sunlight poured in. Elias caught up and froze in place. There, lying in the light, was a lion, no ordinary one but a massive male. His mane was filthy and matted. One of his paws was grotesquely injured, mangled by a metal snare that had dug deep into the limb. Blood pooled beneath him, and his breathing was shallow and strained. The lion's eyes were hazy with pain, and rather than focusing on Elias, they drifted toward Kazzy. The gorilla advanced slowly, not with caution or aggression, but with something mournful in his bearing, as though he saw beyond a danger to something far more profound. The lion didn't flinch or resist. He merely blinked and laid his head down again, yielding to the moment. Elias stood frozen in disbelief. This defied everything he knew. A gorilla and a lion, two apex predators from different worlds, weren't supposed to share the same space, let alone a moment like this. And yet, here they were, one wounded, the other somehow trying to help. Without wasting time, Elias grabbed his radio. "We got a lion caught in a poacher's trap. It's bad, he's bleeding heavily. Bring the emergency kit. Bring everything." While the team prepared to respond, Kazzy stayed rooted beside the lion. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He offered no help that medicine could provide, just his presence. And somehow it was enough. Elias observed the lion's ragged breathing calm slightly whenever Kazzy gave a soft, almost inaudible grunt. Elias wasn't there as a scientist or a journalist. He was simply a man who had seen the raw truths of nature, its savagery, its cruelty, and every now and then, its impossible tenderness. When the support team finally arrived, the sun was already high, and time was critical. Elias administered the tranquilizer carefully, while others unpacked the tools. The metal snare had embedded itself nearly to the bone. A single misstep could cost a lion his leg or his life. Kazzy retreated just far enough to give a human space, but didn't leave. He stood vigilant, watching every movement. As they worked in tense silence, Elias couldn't shake the questions racing through his mind. How had Kazzy found this lion? How did he know where to look or why to care? Yet no logic could explain away the simple, undeniable fact. This gorilla had refused to let the lion die alone. Once the sedative took effect and the lion went limp, the team sprang into action. Elias kneeled beside the wounded paw, careful not to let his hands tremble. Time was running out. The snare had been in place too long. Infection had already set in. Whoever had set the trap had never returned to finish the job, probably too afraid of the lion's strength. But the damage was severe. Elias worked quickly. Sweat ran into his eyes as the bolt cutters bit down. The metal resisted at first, groaning under the pressure. But at last, with one hard twist, The snare snapped open and clattered to the ground. Blood gushed from the torn wound, dark, thick, and foul-smelling. The veterinarian moved in at once, cleaning the area and injecting antibiotics. Another ranger began wrapping the leg tightly in bandages. Meanwhile, Kazzy stayed nearby, now sitting in the shade just a few feet away, motionless except for the rise and fall of his massive chest. It was as though he knew something important was happening, something far greater than himself. When the lion twitched during the bandaging, Kazzy let out a deep, vibrating grunt, a sound that brought the entire team to a halt. Elias had never witnessed anything like it. Kazzy was known for his intelligence and his tendency to protect his own kind, even humans. But this was different. The way Kazzy responded to the lion's pain, the way he cocked his head every time the lion stirred. It wasn't instinct. It was empathy. Elias felt it like a pulse in his bones. Something unspoken had passed between these two creatures, and it shook him deeply. Once the lion was stabilized, the team gently transferred him onto a tarp-covered stretcher and lifted him into the back of a transport vehicle. As the truck started down the dirt road, Kazzy stood up and followed, moving through the trees beside them, sometimes disappearing into brush only to reappear moments later, always keeping pace. At the sanctuary, the lion was placed in a secure recovery enclosure. Straw lined the floor and thick canvas panels kept the midday heat out. The team took shifts monitoring him, checking vitals, administering antibiotics, adjusting sedatives to minimize discomfort. But the most remarkable thing was the lion's calm. Even when he woke up groggy and disoriented, he didn't thrash or roar. He remained quiet, because Kazzy had followed them all the way to the station. No one had seen him arrive. He had simply appeared that evening, sitting silently just outside the fence, watching. Elias didn't send him away. Instead, he sat beside him. Together, they watched the lion breathe. By the following morning, whispers of what had occurred had already spread throughout the conservation community. Drone footage had captured Kazzy approaching the lion and refusing to leave. Scientists began calling. Journalists emailed. But Elias didn't reply, not yet. This wasn't just a headline. This was still happening, still real, still raw. The lion remained stable. Not yet healed, but alive. And Kazzy never left. Day after day, he returned to the enclosure, sitting at the same spot, like a sentinel keeping watch. No one knew why, but Elias had a suspicion. Somewhere, long ago in the wild, something must have occurred, something that had linked these two in a way no one could understand. And now, watching them side by side, Elias saw the truth. They weren't bound by instinct, by rivalry, or by fear. They were bound by something else, something ancient and deep and pure. They had each other, and somehow that was enough. A week passed. The lion, now named Tao, after the ancient word for path or way, had begun showing signs of recovery. He was eating, albeit slowly, and the infected wound, once angry and swollen, was finally receding under the care of the sanctuary's veterinary team. His golden eyes, once foggy with agony, now held a cautious light. But what truly astonished the caretakers was his behavior. Tao didn't growl or posture when humans approached. He didn't try to assert dominance. And each time Kazzy appeared at the edge of the enclosure, Tao would rise, slowly, stiffly, and move as close to the fence as he could, lying down there and staring out at the gorilla. They would sit like that for hours, separated by metal and protocol, yet united by something no cage could define. It was an unspoken communion, a silent conversation of breath, gaze, and presence. By now, the story had gone viral. News outlets were running headlines like, "Gorilla guides rangers to injured lion in unprecedented act of empathy." The bond that defies nature, a lion and a gorilla's unlikely connection. But Elias didn't care about the coverage. He cared about the lion, and he cared about what Kazzy was teaching all of them. One afternoon, Elias decided to try something bold. The team had moved Tao to an outdoor medical pen, where he could stretch his legs under close supervision. The fence was taller here, reinforced, with a shaded viewing platform nearby. Elias brought Kazzy to that platform. Kazzy stood there, calm and attentive, watching Tao pace clumsily on his bandaged paw. Tao paused when he spotted Kazzy. Then, with great effort, he limped across the enclosure and sat down directly in front of him. It was as if the pain in Tao's leg no longer mattered. Kazzy let out a low hum and placed a hand on the wooden railing. Tao pressed his nose to the opposite side. There was something ancient in that moment, something that bypassed biology, species, and fear. The sanctuary staff watched in awe, no one daring to speak. Kazzy didn't beat his chest. Tao didn't roar. They simply sat in that still, quiet place together, as though time itself had made room for them. The following weeks saw steady progress. Tao regained strength, learned to walk without limping, and even began to vocalize more. He let out deep, rolling chuffs whenever Kazzy appeared, a sound that researchers eventually came to recognize as his version of greeting. Some skeptics dismissed the interaction as coincidence. Others chalked it up to familiarity, nothing more. But those who witnessed it firsthand knew better. They'd seen Kazzy touch the earth with reverence when Tao approached, had seen Tao lie down beside the fence, even when Kazzy was late, waiting like a friend who believed someone would come. By the third month, Tao was thriving. The wound had fully healed, leaving behind only a scar, a long, jagged reminder of what he had survived. Plans began to form around his future, whether he would remain permanently at the sanctuary or eventually be transferred to a larger wildlife reserve. But there was one thing no one debated. Kazzy had changed him, and Kazzy had changed, too. He was more attentive to human caregivers, more expressive, more engaged. It was as if in saving Tao, he had uncovered a deeper part of himself, an emotional terrain no one had thought to map in a gorilla. On the 100th day since their first meeting, Elias brought the two to a specially constructed observation area, one with reinforced glass. For the first time, they saw each other without bars, without distance, without anything between them but light and breath. Kazzy placed a massive hand against the glass. Tao stepped forward, looked into his eyes, and let out a single, rumbling chuff that echoed against the walls. Then, slowly, Tao pressed his scarred paw against the other side. Their hands met, palm to paw, flesh to glass, and the entire room fell still. Elias stood back, heart heavy with something like reverence. He wasn't watching animals anymore. He was watching two souls who had found each other, not in spite of their differences, but because of them. Not because nature demanded it, but because compassion did. And in that moment, it was enough. Word of the connection between Tao and Kazzy had spread far beyond the sanctuary's borders. Scientists, ethologists, and animal behaviors from all over the globe had flown in to witness it. Some came with skepticism. Many left in silence, moved by something they could not easily explain. Elias kept detailed logs, recording every shared moment, every chuff, every time Kazzy placed a hand on the fence when Tao was nearby. But he also recorded something subtler, the way both creatures had begun to change. Tao no longer seemed restless. His eyes, once shadowed with trauma, held clarity and focus. He moved with strength again, no longer the limping survivor they had first rescued. But more than that, he showed restraint. Where another lion might growl or react when approached, Tao often sat quietly, head tilted in a curious, almost listening posture, especially when Kazzy was near. Kazzy, too, seemed transformed. His attention span had increased. His vocalizations had changed, no longer random hoots or chest beats, but complex hums and trills that matched the times he saw Tao. Elias, trained in primate behavior, had no reference for some of the sounds Kazzy now made. It was as though the gorilla had developed a new language, born from interspecies empathy. The sanctuary began building something unprecedented, a shared observation corridor, a split enclosure design, safe for both animals, where Kazzy and Tao could interact more freely through reinforced transparent barriers, much like aquarium glass, but tougher than any bulletproof material used by humans. It took 2 months to finish, and when it was ready, they brought the two to either side of it. The first meeting was tentative. Kazzy approached slowly, then sat down with his back resting against the wall, looking sideways at Tao. Tao, regal and calm, paced once, then lay down directly in front of him. Their eyes locked, and that's when something extraordinary happened. Kazzy reached into his own enclosure and pulled forward a leafy branch, plucked from a treat bundle. He placed it gently on the floor against the glass. Tao stood, walked forward, and sniffed the other side of the glass where the branch lay. Then, with incredible gentleness, he lowered his massive head and chuffed. To any observer, it looked like an offering, a gift across the barrier, a lion receiving a branch from a gorilla. For days, the two repeated this ritual. Kazzy would bring small items, leaves, fruit, even his favorite blanket once, and lay them near the divider. Tao never touched the items, but he always responded with a chuff and rested beside them. The Elias began to understand. This wasn't communication in the human sense. It was ritual, ceremony, a way for two beings with no common tongue to say, "I see you, I remember." And Tao, he seemed to carry those memories in every step he took. He no longer responded to sanctuary staff as a typical lion. He was calm, poised, strangely perceptive. One handler remarked that being around him felt like being watched by someone who understood loss. By the time a year had passed, Tao had become the sanctuary's most iconic resident. School children wrote letters to him. Documentaries were filmed. Scientists submitted research papers. But none of it captured the simple truth. Tao wasn't just a lion who had healed. He was a lion who had been witnessed. One early morning, Elias arrived to find Kazzy standing at the wall again. It had become their ritual. Kazzy would arrive first. Tao, who had learned to wake before sunrise, would come to greet him. But today, Tao didn't come. Kazzy waited. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. Elias grew concerned and quietly radioed the medical team. They found Tao in his shelter, lying down. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't sick. But something was off. He hadn't eaten, hadn't moved. As the team prepared to sedate him for tests, Tao stood shakily, and made his way, slowly, deliberately, to the observation corridor. When he arrived, Kazzy was still waiting. And the moment Tao saw him, the lion gave a low, trembling chuff. Then he pressed his head to the glass. Kazzy responded not with sound, but by sitting, arms open, palms aglass, as if to receive him. That day marked the beginning of Tao's decline. The old wound had healed, but new ones, internal ones, were surfacing. Age was catching up, the damage done by years of suffering, and exposure began to weigh on his organs. The vet team did everything, but deep down they knew Tao didn't have much time. The question arose, how should they let him go? The answer came from Kazzy. On what would become Tao's final day, Kazzy arrived at the corridor before sunrise. He sat for hours, unmoving. The sky turned pink, then golden. The staff brought Tao out one last time. He was weak. Breathing was shallow, but he stood tall, walked the divider, and once again pressed his head to the glass. Kazzy made a soft, chest-deep hum. Elias, watching with tears in his eyes, later described it not as a sound of mourning, but of release. Tao lowered himself, laid down against the glass, and closed his eyes. He didn't move again. The sanctuary held a quiet memorial. There were no speeches, no cameras, only the team, Kazzy, and a small arrangement of leaves and flowers placed in Tao's favorite resting spot. Kazzy visited it daily for weeks. Sometimes he would sit beside the glass. Other times, he would bring small objects, branches, fruit pebbles, and place them by the edge before walking away. He never stayed long, as though he knew Tao wasn't there anymore, but still wanted the world to remember. Years passed. Kazzy grew older, wiser. His story and Tao's became legend among conservationists. Their names were spoken at conferences, their bond taught in university courses about cross-species empathy. And at the sanctuary, a plaque was placed near the observation corridor. It read, "Here, two beings met, not as lion gorilla, not as predator and primate, but as souls. May we all learn to see beyond what separates us." And beneath it, carved in quiet letters, Tao and Kazzy, twenty twenty-five, healed, witnessed, remembered,